Matt Haycox, welcome to the show. How are you
Thanks
doing
for having
today?
me.
Likewise, it's a pleasure. For people that don't know you, because I've been to a few of your talks in Marbella and in Dubai, but it's the first time I'm having this raw conversation. Who are you? How do you help people?
I'm a career entrepreneur, I guess in simple terms. I mean, I'm 44 now. I've been in business since I've been officially in business since I was 18 and 19. Wanted to be in business long before that, meddling with everything. And my core business is finance, but I've basically spent my whole career both building my own businesses and raising capital for my own businesses. So what I do now tends to kind of live off the back of that. I always say I've spent so much time and raising money for my own businesses that I kind of learned how to help other people raise money for their businesses. And I spent so much time borrowing money that I now became a lender as well. So I guess I'm a multifaceted entrepreneur, a jack of all trades, hopefully a master of some. And in terms of how do I help people, I try and help people not make the mistakes that I've been making all of my career. And I invest money, I lend money, and I mentor as and where I can.
I love that. For you, you mentioned along the lines of like you help people prevent making the mistakes that you made. In like in addition to that, what problem are you most obsessed with solving today?
Well, my biggest problem today is really a problem I should have solved, 25 years ago when I started business, which is lack of standardization across my businesses. I guess by that I mean, standard operating procedures, simple policies, procedures to be able to make a business scalable. And to a lot of people listening to this, particularly a lot of the younger guys who've grown up on content, it almost probably sounds laughable to listen to me talk about, because I know today's world is full of Notion documents and Google this and Google the other, as in not Googling it, but Google Documents, Google Sheets, whatever. But I never really came from that world, and I've always been a lot more of a kind of a get on and do it and pick up the pieces later on, or hopefully have someone else pick up the pieces for me. But what I've really come to the realization of over the last year or so is, have I ever actually had great businesses, or have I just earn great money for myself? And there is a big distinction between those two things, and I think it's something that many people make the mistake of when they come to wanting to sell a business and being very delusional about the figures that they can get for it, because ultimately the value in a business is in really having a redundant CEO, and I am unfortunately anything but redundant in my businesses. And I think maybe there's been times I've wanted to feel the most important part of things, and now I realise that not only should I not be the most important part of things if I want to pass the business on and pass on the baton, but also there's going to be a lot less value in the business the more essential I am to it. But I think over the years we hire new people, they have nothing clear to walk into, no standard procedures. We lose those people, we waste so much time rehiring, retraining, everything. So bit of a long story around that, but yeah, my biggest problem is lack of standardization, and that is something I am absolutely anal about at the moment across all our businesses.
It's funny you said about the SOPs and the aspects of like this lack of standardization. Do you think that's always been a thing, or do you reckon that's because of nowadays with the climate, in terms of how like a lot of people have to wear different hats and they get distracted? Would you say that's always been a thing, or would you say that's kind of like a new
I think it must have always been a thing in a great business, because ultimately you can't have a great business without the SOPs. We can call them SOPs, or we can call it a franchisable business model or standardization, whatever you want to call 100%. It. But I mean, that clearly has been around since the beginning of time for the great businesses. I think what's changed now, maybe two things. One, obviously, just greater availability of information that we hear about this stuff more than before. But I think also there's a lot more smaller businesses than there probably were back in the day, and a lot more one-man band entrepreneurs who are trying to operate at scale, or even if they're not trying to operate at scale, they're trying to have an easier life. And whether you want to scale or whether you want to have more time to yourself, those SOPs are essential for both of those things. So I think think that's probably why it's become more prevalent in people who wouldn't have had them before. I think, like I said, the big businesses have always had them, but the one-man band entrepreneurs, the kind of the freelancers, the solo entrepreneurs, those kind of people, they would just probably never have done it before. And I think now, because they know they should do, because there's easier availability of information, I think it's become more prevalent.
What's interesting is, are you familiar with the difference between childlike learning and adult learning?
No, I'm not. I mean, if you describe it, I probably
it's
am.
Like childlike learning is when you learn a new topic and it's too much, you run away. Adult learning is like, right, that's a challenge. I have to overcome this.
Okay.
To learn a new topic, to advance. And if I was interesting is, and this might kind of like, this is something that actually stuck with me years ago, where I kind of learned a new topic, but I'm thinking, actually, is that a distraction? Is that a new thing I need to implement? And that would probably like push me away from implementing it. But now we had to kind of like almost dig into the business and be like, how can we get all of our members like standardized level of results, make sure this is like the minimum you're going to get, and then beyond that we have to standardize that. So it's quite interesting you said that, because that's something I've actually been kind of having a conversation in my mind, actually, how can we standardize everything to make sure everything is legit and is all providing the quality service that we want to deliver and what we want to be known for, which is excellent. For you, do you think business is for everyone?
So I think absolutely. I don't think owning and running businesses are for everyone. I think everyone can probably learn from business and behave in, let's use the word entrepreneur, because look, I guess owning and operating a business brings a level of skill set and a level of risk that everybody isn't capable of, and that also everybody isn't interested in. But I think, operating like an entrepreneur, trying to be better every day, trying to find better ways to do things. I mean, that is applicable to absolutely everybody. And I mean, we have a core set of values across my businesses, and one of the values I want to present them to people is that we are entrepreneurial. And I always say that that is not something that's layered at me at the top of the pyramid or at the C-suite itself. It's for everybody across the business. Whether you're a receptionist, a part-time cleaner, a bookkeeper, or moving higher up the management structure of the business, everyone can operate in an entrepreneurial way. Trying to do more with less, trying to get rid of waste, trying to find more efficient ways to do things, etc. So, learnings of business for everybody, but certainly not taking the financial risks of not knowing whether there's a check that's going to come at the end of the month.
All of that. For you to dive into, this kind of crosses nicely into the next topic. You've made millions, you've lost millions. What's something that success didn't teach you, but failure did?
I always say success don't really teach you anything, because I don't think you know why it happened. I mean, we like to kid ourselves that we know why it happened, and we say, well, I had a plan and it all went exactly as I planned, and that's why I'm so successful. Yeah. But the reality is, if nothing went wrong along the way with that plan, how do you ever really know that that was the plan that worked out, and that it wasn't just luck, good timing, good fortune, whatever it may be. I think everything I've really learned from failure. I hope, some of it not always been my own failure, and that's why I always say to other people that, I make the mistake so that you don't have to, because I think ultimately everything in life that has been learned from things going wrong. When you say, well, the creation of any product, of anything, whether that's a Tesla car through to the discovery of electricity or fire or any of these things. I mean, they've all happened by people trying and failing something else, and maybe those outcomes were accidental outcomes, but no one ever sat down and said, I'm going to go and invent electricity, and I'm going to make this plan, I'm going to get it right first time. It's all those learnings from the failure. So everything that's gone wrong for me has been my teachers over the years.
Did you have to teach yourself to be a little bit more risk averse, or has that always been the thing?
Well, I think it's not that I've taught myself to be more risk averse. I mean, I love risk. It's not that I love risk insofar as I'm a risk junkie, and I don't really consider myself a gambler, because I consider them, let's say, educated risks, educated guesses. But I guess it's more that I'm not so afraid of the downside, if that makes sense. So I think as time's gone on, I've taught myself to be maybe a little more protective of the downside, in that, if you'd have asked me 20 years ago, maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, the moves I would make, I would probably happily lose absolutely everything I've got, just because, I believe in the journey I was going down, and I believe in taking those risks. If you ask me today, okay, I'm not going to bet the entirety of everything I've got on any one individual project, but for me, it's still about inventing new things, about solving problems, about moving forward, and you can't do any of that without taking risk. And for me, that's more important, that's more exciting, that's where my life lives more than being excited about the individual trappings of making the money. And that's not to say I've not had the trappings and not enjoyed them along the way, but I think I've also had all the times when I've not had them, and I don't really miss them when they're not there. I never appreciate them enough when I've got them. I don't mean that in a unappreciative way. What I mean is they sound a lot better on paper than they are in real life. And I know people listening to this will always think, well, that's easy for him to say because he's had them. I can tell you, for every Ferrari I've ever bought, for every fancy holiday I've ever been on, or private jet I've ever paid for, whatever, it's always sounded a lot more exciting to think about buying it than it actually has been to buy it. And therefore, when I've not had them, I've never really struggled to not have them. So yeah, it's not the material things that worry me with the risk. It's I think a life of not taking risk would be ultimately much more depressing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what's funny is me and Charlie Johnson actually spoke about this a while back. It was actually kind of the topic of coming to risk and then coming to people's personal life that affects their business. I think a lot of times, and this is something that may actually you might have a lot to share on. It's like actually people don't take risk because of the consequence they'll have on other people around them, whether it's investing into a course, investing into, let's say, starting a business, spending more time and investing the energy into certain things, and it's almost like I'll have to work more, I'll have to do more things at the detriment of this person. Have you ever found a better question actually, would you say, have you ever found actually that's something you've seen other people where the personal life gets in front of the business success? And what would be your best advice for someone that's trying to juggle the business, the personal life, and have it all, you can say?
Just so I totally understand what you're saying, are you saying that they don't take risks within the business because they're worried about the impact of that on the personal life, be that embarrassment from friends or lack of money in their personal life?
I think another way to say it would be almost like for someone that's letting their personal life hold back business decisions and driving the life forward, whether it's like the wife, the partner, the spouse.
Okay, I mean, in that context, absolutely. I mean, and you mentioned the wife, and listen, it's not a sexist conversation. I'm sure it cuts just the same way. When the woman's the business owner and the man's at home. But yeah, I mean, I've seen business owners time and time again not make the best decisions for their business because their wife at home has told them what they can and can't do, whether that's where they can invest money, or whether or not they can sign a guarantee, or whether or not they can spend time on the business because they should be spending time at home with her or the kids or whatever it may be. So yeah, I mean, the vast majority of businesses that I've come across have been hampered in some way by constraints outside of the business, and that's good. And that doesn't have to be the wife, that doesn't have to be, that could be the kids, that could be the guy's personal life, it could be anything, but constraints outside of the business are normally one of the biggest things that hold it back. And I think that's the same whether it's a business, whether it's an individual, because I mean you could, and it doesn't even have to be a business. I think anything in life, I mean, if you're a kid studying for your exams right now, I mean, consider that your business. Your constraints aren't probably your ability to read a book or your ability to absorb information. Your constraints are probably, shall I go and get pissed with my mates, or do I fancy watching a new Netflix series, etc. So it really comes down to where is your focus, and where do you want to put 100% of your future efforts. How much do you want the outcome?
Have you ever found that to be the case where that's held you back in the past? So have you overcome it?
No, I haven't, to be honest, because my business has always been my main driver. If anything, it's had the inverse effect, or the opposite effect rather, that my personal life may have suffered because I've concentrated on the business. But I also, in the same token, I couldn't really tell you situations where I think, I've really made a mistake there one way or the other, because, when I say I think I've had the balance right, I also say I don't think there is balance. It's whatever feels right for me at the time. And listen, I've lived and breathed business since I was 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
So any female that I've been in a relationship with has always had to understand the game that, I love my work and that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be lying on the couch at night with my laptop. Most of my dinners might be business dinners. I'm going to be talking business when we're away on holiday. And and also when it comes to money, my money is my money. And I don't say that in a selfish way or a tight way. Yes, whilst you're with me, you can share in that. I will look after you well. There'll be the family pot. There'll be whatever. But if I want to take risks, then I'm going to take the risks. And if that means that we lose some things along the way, then you have to accept that. And if that's not for you, then we shouldn't be together. Now, to be clear, following on from what I was saying earlier about not betting the house on things, obviously I'm not going to take a risk today that's going to stop the school fees from being able to be paid, or from meaning whether or not we can eat tonight or go to a decent restaurant. But I will happily take risks that could be the material difference between, are we going to be flying on a private jet next month, or are we just going to be going business class, for example. For me, my partner has to accept that, or not be with me. When it comes to the kids, have I been to every school sports day, every play? No, I haven't. Do I regret not doing it? Maybe there's times I think, what, I spent all that time on that business and it failed, and what was the point in missing those opportunities with my kids? But at the time, within reason, I think 95% of everything I've ever done has felt right. That yes, I could not go to work, and I could do every school run, I could go to every school play, I could help my kids with every single piece of homework. But then, and I might be chalked down as the world's best father, but I'd also know that when I'm lying on my deathbed, I'll be thoroughly miserable that I've missed out on the chances to do what I wanted with business. So I think all I can really do is do what I think is best for me, whilst being fair enough to those around me. And we'll have some honest conversations along the way. Like I said, I don't always get it right. I'm always happy to be listened to. But if, for example, if a girlfriend ever turned around to me and said, listen, I need you to work a 9 to 5 and we're going to do this, that and the other. Sorry, love.
Walking the other way.
You know where the door is.
It's funny because it actually reminds me of my upbringing, because we never came from like a upbringing where we had a lot given. It was single mom, me, my mom, my brother, my grandma who passed away. And it was almost like we had to pretty much work for everything we had. And I was actually the first person in our family to go to university and to get a job and to have a business. And like, it still is that way, to be fair, which is quite interesting. And our brother's obviously, he's in a very good place himself. But growing up, we didn't really have much given, or we didn't have much, so we had to work for it. And it was actually from, I think it was like, last year was the first birthday I ever celebrated. And because I was almost in that spot where I was like, don't deserve it, this is bullshit, what's the point of having a birthday, it's all about work. And to be honest, I don't regret that. I think that's the beauty of it, because I remember it was like, there was a point where I was like completely distant. I'd wake up at 3:45 to go to one job, to go to the next job, to go to university, finish at 11, and I have to have I literally had a coffee next to me every single morning to get out of bed. And that was the only way I got up. But that actually taught me so much, because even though I was distant from family, I had no friends, just work, and I was consistently just doubling down on that. Now it's much better as a byproduct. It's like I can either go back and build that life I had back then and stay where I was at, or currently build a future life which I have right now. And this continues to go right way, keep building the life I've got right now, or the future life in a sense. And it's almost like it's hard to live in the future because you don't know it's going to happen, and you're not sure if you're going to get there in a sense. And almost like if it's guaranteed as well, which is quite interesting too, because people love guarantees. For you, would you say most of your decisions, tie that into a question, is based on now or the future? And how do you balance in terms of the focus between now and later?
Well, I think depending on when you'd have asked me those questions, I'd have given very very much different answers along the way. I think probably historically, I was a lot more focused on building things for the future than enjoying the present. Whereas over the last 12 months, I've become a lot more focused on enjoying the here and now as well. Not that I don't want to build something for the future, because I like I say, I've not taken my foot off the gas in business. I've just, let's say, tried to not have any distracted focus. I mean, I think I've been a bit of a busy fool on many things over the years, and over the last year or two, I've tried to concentrate more on the things that I know can derive the best outcome. I guess the real 80-20 principle.
Yeah. I like that.
And because I was involved in businesses that either made no money and consumed my time, or didn't make enough money for the time I put into them. And what that ultimately did was take time away from the good businesses. Or the way I now also look at it is say, well, I was clearly happy with the amount of time I was spending on the good businesses. So rather than spending even more time on them, do I want more time for myself? Do I want more time to spend with the kids? So I think there's got to be a balance. Now maybe that also depends what age you are. I think if I'm 18, 19, 20, I think one of my failings when I was younger was lack of patience and really wanting everything now.
Gotcha.
Whereas I obviously want some things now, but I think it's more a split of building businesses for the future, but still enjoying today, because whilst I also feel younger and in better shape now than I was 10 or 15 years ago, I'm also very appreciative of the fact that the next 15 or 20 years is going to disappear in a blink of an eye. And I also could die walking out of this podcast studio right now. So I think I have got to enjoy the present as well.
What's one belief that you had during your mid-20s that would completely destroy where you're at today?
That I need to own all of everything. That it's that things was much more a one-man game. So I paused to answer then, because I was trying to process a question in your head. I was going to say something a different way around. In my 20s, whether it was because of ego or whether it was because of misunderstanding, I wanted to be the 100% owner, CEO, chairman, top dog of absolutely everything, and thought that was the only way to own everything, and that was the only way to make money. And as time has evolved, I have very much realised how much further I can go and how much more money I can make by having smaller pieces of much bigger pies and partnering up with people who are much better in certain areas than me. And I think there's that whether it's ego, delusion, whatever it is, that you've got to be the 100% shareholder of this, that and the other, to really make money and to be in control. But would you rather have 100% of a shit business, or would you rather have 0.001% of Apple or Google or Microsoft? Now that's obviously an extreme example, but but in the context of, let's say, SME businesses, do I want to own something myself, or do I want to give some equity stakes away to people who can really bring something to the table, who can run departments that I could never run, that could bring a level of motivation to it and discipline that I could never hire in somebody else. And I think I got a lot better at that 5 or 10 years ago, probably more 5 than 10. But in my 20s I was absolutely the other way, and I think if I'd have continued that to this day, I mean, never mind SOPs being my biggest failing now, I think if I'd be here today with no partners, no SOPs, no discipline, no nothing.
Love that. It's kind of the analogy of what you said there about, would you rather have a small piece of a big pie or a big piece of a small pie?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and my biggest lesson in business is realizing you can do it all because you can do it quick, but if you want to grow the distance, it's having someone that you can actually trust and being able to trust people as well at the same time.
Well, then ultimately, what do you want at the end of it? And if we're looking at business just to make money, let's ignore the other factors. If you just want to make money, well, then you want to make the most amount of money. And do you want 100% of 100 grand, or do you want 1% of 500 million? And they're extreme numbers for example's sake. But I mean, ultimately that's what it is. If you want to, you might want to control something and change the world or whatever it may be, but does that necessarily have to be in the business that you're making money in?
Just to dive away from business into kind of uncovering the veil. What's the hardest thing you've ever done?
What's the hardest thing I've ever done? So probably the hardest thing I ever do is uncomfortable conversations with other people. I think whenever it comes to doing something for myself, I can probably deal with pretty much anything. I think physically hard things, I just do them to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
Probably moan like fuck while I'm
Mixed
doing
feelings,
it, and then it's forgotten thereafter. And when it comes to mental toughness, typically mental toughness goes with a physical challenge, and I just zip it and get on with it. When it comes to hard things, it's really been I guess firing people, breakups with partners that maybe should have been done earlier, and having to spend time away from the kids that I'd rather not. I mean, listen, I have an 18-year-old daughter back in the UK. She'd been in Dubai for a week. She went home a couple of days ago. I'm not going to see her again until July. That's 3 months, and to some people that might not sound much, but for me that's infinitely tougher than anything else that I have to think about or deal with. I don't really have an issue with pressure. I don't really have an issue with stress. People say to me, people close to me on a constant basis say to me, how do you possibly deal with the levels of pressure that you're under every day? And they say, we couldn't do it 10% of what you do for a week. You do it all day, every day, and you've done it for 20 odd years. And I think ultimately for me, it's just, I guess, almost like a muscle that I've become accustomed to, and that I accept that when it comes to building businesses, you're going to get stress. When it comes to making money, you're going to have haters that want to bring you down, and that ultimately there's always going to be someone else trying to eat my lunch in every department. Whether that's take my business, make me look a twat, shag my missus, whatever it is. And these are just part and parcel of life. And I think the more you deal with it, the easier it becomes. But emotional things with the kids, you can probably never get easier.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing that as well. It's for you, just kind of like dive into what you said at the start there about like the physical, the mental fortitude. Nowadays with the climate right now, what we've seen is obviously mental health has dropped, physical health has dropped. The regular person suffers with 17 different things. And what's actually interesting is, I don't know where I heard it. I was actually in an app called Medium. Are you familiar with the app called Medium?
I am, the reading thing.
Yeah, like I've been obsessed with that. And like sometimes if I'm just like on Instagram, I'm like, close the app, go into Medium to find something. And they actually said something which actually probably will strike hot for a lot of people. But a lot of things like ADHD, bipolar isn't created by doctors, it's created by copywriters.
Right.
What do you think of that?
I mean, it's not. None of that is my area of expertise in any way. Look, when it comes to things like ADHD, anxiety, that kind of stuff, I'm always conscious what I say because I don't want to. I don't want to, let's say, offend or belittle those who genuinely suffer from something. But I think nowadays, far too many people suddenly suffer from these things because it suits them, or just because they're hiding from reality. When someone goes, I've got anxiety, have you got anxiety, or are you just dealing with real life, and real life has got stress? I also, think there's not many girls who don't post on Instagram about their anxiety that wouldn't lose it in a heartbeat if they stopped sniffing on a Saturday night and spending all week on a come down. So, listen, there's no question that today's world, there's things out there that do create addiction and anxiety and ADHD type behaviour and stuff. I guess I see it in the context of my own baby. I've got a 2-year-old, and some of the TV shows she watches or some of the little theme parks and stuff she goes to, unquestionably stuff that exists today that didn't exist 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, will fuck with your brain in a different way. But then I also think, in the woke society that we live in, mental health is just used as an excuse for the fact that people can't be asked to do a good day's shift.
1,000%. It's funny because the one thing I don't stand for is labeling sometimes, because as soon as someone says I'm a negative person, I've got this, I've got that, I'm like, is that helping you? Is it serving you? And it's usually, it's not. And it's like, we hear it a lot where it's like, "Oh, I'm just like a pessimist, I'm a negative person, I've got this, I'm stressed and labels." And whenever like I had to train myself to start to not use labels at all anymore. I'm